Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. We're talking about Kamala Harris and what happens if the President Biden's poll numbers don't improve. Kyle said no serious Democrats, Robert Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson, neither of which I give a lot of standing to, but no serious Democrat has challenged Joe Biden, and none seems willing to, frankly. I mean, Gavin Newsom said explicitly that he is not going to challenge Biden as long as he's running, though I think that if he did withdraw, then I think Gavin Newsom would get in the race, and I think several governors would be potential candidates. J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, maybe Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, although he's only been in the job a little more than a year. Not even a year yet, I'm sorry. But there is some potential candidates there who would take on Kamala Harris. I don't have any doubt they'd get in, do you?
No, not at all. And by the way, I mean, they have these days a much more extensive bench of people who could get in the race. I would name, in addition to those governors you pointed out, there are certain senators who are still very interested in this. I keep seeing the press salivating over the idea of a Gretchen Whitmer, Raphael Warnock ticket. He's the senator from Georgia. But not only has nobody come out, Gretchen Whitmer is actually the co-chair of Joe Biden's campaign. And so these people seem more interested at the moment of keeping their ties and bending the knee, maybe in hope of some future cabinet position or who knows, instead of standing up. And here's one of the problems I see for the party, an additional factor in here, is that so long as the party stalwarts, the establishment as it were, are not going to challenge Joe Biden, I think that they are increasing the possibility that someone on the edges of the Democratic Party is going to get in on a third party run. So we already have Professor Cornel West, who's in the race. He doesn't seem to be drawing, more than a couple percentage points. But cue Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, who there's a lot of interest, him being recruited by this No Labels organization to also get in the race. I think that's also a real possibility for Democrats and potentially a real problem for them.
You're saying that Joe Biden, if he stays in, will invite more such talk because of the polling that shows that 73% of the public don't think he's up to running again.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that combination of weakness, but also the fact that you've got a guy maybe like Joe Manchin, who very clearly doesn't agree with the progressive direction of the Democratic Party at the moment, has been quite frustrated over the way that Joe Biden has led the party and the presidency. I think that combination could be a very powerful factor for someone potentially getting in. Also add that Joe Manchin right now could be in big trouble getting reelected in West Virginia.
Yeah, he's way behind in the polls. He's counting on a bloody Republican primary there. And he may get it, but he's still way behind in that state right now in the polling. Your point about third party, I think, helps to explain why a couple of veterans of winning Democratic campaigns, Jim Messina, a former Biden advisor, and James Carville, of course, Bill Clinton's strategist, are both moaning about what they call the Democratic bedwetters. And, stop complaining about President Biden and get behind him, rally and stop whispering your concerns. Instead, start getting behind him in a way that will overcome whatever doubts they have. And Messina, of course, thinks that Obama's low standing in the polls a year before his reelection is maybe a harbinger here of what could happen. And as Democrats come together in an election year to support Joe Biden, particularly, Kyle, if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. Donald Trump, the greatest Democratic mobilizer since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, drives Democrats to the polls. And I guess they're basically counting on that to help Joe Biden win again.
And the other thing they're counting on, which I think is a reasonable point, is that we don't have national elections. So a lot of the polls that we've been talking about are national polls. So the CNN one that says Joe Biden loses to Donald Trump by 1 point, that's a national poll. And the real question when it comes down to the Electoral College is, what does Pennsylvania do? What does Michigan, Wisconsin do? What does Georgia do? And there, I think they probably have a sense that given a rematch of the 2020 election, those states will fall in President Biden's column, as they did in 2020, with the president making a sort of centrist pitch about norms and so forth. I mean, those states were very narrowly decided in 2020. So it's not as if I think they are expecting a blowout, but I think they feel that President Biden can eke through there. And the other thing that is important to point out is just that we have more unexpecteds, I think, more known unknowns, to use the Rumsfeld phrase, than we have in a long time. And part of that is the dislike of each of these candidates. As Kim says, there's this No Labels group that is talking about running a third-party challenge. They say they will only do that if we have a Biden and Trump rematch. But if we do, who do they pick? How does that person campaign? Is it a Republican? Is it a Democrat? Do they put Joe Manchin at the top of the ticket? Or do they put a Republican office holder, Chris Sununu, governor of New Hampshire, at the top of the ticket? And how does that affect where that option on the ballot pulls from? Does it pull more from Republicans or Democrats? I mean, the 2016 election, particularly the Republican primary, was extremely unpredictable. And I thought that maybe that was the peak of unpredictability. But it looks like in 2024, we may get another one that is very difficult to handicap.
Well, you have this extraordinary circumstance that I cannot remember in my career. Maybe the closest was 1992, when George H.W. Bush was unpopular and Bill Clinton, emerging as the Democratic nominee, was broadly unpopular at the time before he went to the Democratic convention. And you had the rise of Ross Perot for a while there before he left the race, of course, then came back at the end and finished with 19% of the vote. But you have the situation where two of the leading nominees, both nominees in the parties, are both unpopular. And in both cases, the public says they shouldn't run for re-election, as one is a president now and a former president. So that leads to this extraordinary circumstance where all kinds of things could happen, Kim.
Right. The dynamics of this are very odd on the Democratic side because no one will challenge Joe Biden. He looks as though he's going to be a lock. On the Republican side, because so many people are challenging Donald Trump and none of them are so far getting out. He hasn't had a real rival, and he could divide and conquer the way he did in 2016. I find it very risky for the Democrats to be doing this, because my own personal opinion is that Republicans console themselves and they say, oh, look, Donald Trump, he's polling even with Joe Biden in the poll, even though he's been indicted, 96 times. And that just goes to show, his staying power. My own view is that right now, if Donald Trump were not in this race and there were any qualified, capable, younger Republican who looked like they were going to get the nomination, these numbers would be hugely lopsided because Joe Biden is just so unpopular. And that is potentially what Republicans are missing by, sticking with Donald Trump, especially because this is really Joe Biden's best card going into the election. That they love Democrats. You mentioned Jim Messina. He put out a slide presentation for Democrats to reassure them last week and noted that they're going to use the same issues that they used last time in the 2022 midterms, which he noted helped them, quote, overperform. So he recognized that they did better than they should have. And those issues were Donald Trump and, ultra mega Republicans and, issues like abortion and voting rights, which scare people to the polls. So again, I think that if the Republican Party were looking at this differently, I think this race would be really scary for Democrats.
All right, Kim, thank you. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day with the Potomac Watch. Thank you for listening.